we're loading up on the trucks and we're just hauling ass to this target, like SWAT team style. So there I am on the back of a Tacoma with the beds down, and we're just sitting there on the bed, like hauling ass down the Baghdad International Airport road, down Route Irish, going 70 miles per hour. And I'm like, this is pretty cool, but it's really going to suck if I fall out of the truck on the way to target. We go into just the outskirts of Sadr City, and this is summer of 2003. So the IED threat is sort of there, but it's not sophisticated. And most of the military still didn't have up armored vehicles. So we're rolling around in no armored Tacomas. That's what, some of the guys invaded the country in. They just stayed there. We kind of modified them. Could put a 240 on them, or you could take the 240 off and you can make it more low profile. But we get a mission to go hit a house on the outskirts of Sadr City. I think he was a deck of cards guy. I don't remember if he was an Al-Qaeda guy or a deck of cards guy, but pretty nice house, pretty big, gated compound and all that. Excuse me. And literally our plan is like, we're loading up on the trucks, and we're just hauling ass to this target, like SWAT team style. So there I am on the back of a Tacoma with the beds down, and we're just sitting there on the bed, like hauling ass down the Baghdad International Airport road, down Route Irish, going 70 miles per hour. And I'm like, this is pretty cool, but it's really going to suck if I fall out of the truck on the way to target. So I'm like, death grip on that thing like it matters, But man, we get there. And we have one of our guys get up on a ladder to kind of clear the courtyard. And then we end up ramming the gate, and then the front door is pretty beefy. So we had already made the decision ahead of time. We were just going to explosively breach it. So slap a half block of C4 on it and blow it in. I was the first guy in the house, that was my job. So ran in, and from that target, man, I was so focused. Like, I literally still, when I think of that, I remember seeing like the red dot on my EOTech, because I'm like, scanning my sector, and like, it's just super intense, like trying to clear everything. I remember pretty much everything from clearing that house still to this day, because it was just so ingrained in my head. So it was, we didn't get into like a big gunfight or anything. We got the guy we were after, did the whole sensitive site exploitation and tactical questioning and all that. But doing actually putting an explosive block on someone's front door and blowing it in, and then running through the house and like doing my job, I was like, well, this is pretty big. This is like a bigger accomplishment than anything I've done up to this point in the military. Yeah, because this is the first real thing I did.
How do you feel you performed on your first operation?
Well, good. I mean, I felt good because I, ran towards the sound of the guns, essentially. Like, you blow in that breach, and it's confusing, right? You don't know what's on the other side of the door. There's all that smoke and confusion. And I wanted to be in that room getting into a fight if there was one to have. So I felt good about that. But then, then I look, and this on subsequent targets, this happened too. I look at like how amped up I am compared to like my team sergeant, who might not even he probably didn't have like an elevated pulse at the time. And I'm like, all right, I need to kind of be more on his level, because he's noticing way more things than I'm noticing. Much later on, we end up going on a hit. And a guy, not in my sector, but I see this kind of out of my periphery, a guy comes up out of the room that we're in, and he's got an AK like this. And my team sergeant just like casually reaches over, like it's a child, and grabs the AK and just like punches the dude. And like later on, once we get everything under control, I'm like, why didn't you shoot that guy? And he's like, oh, because I looked, AK, the selector lever was up, and his hand was on the buttstock. It wasn't anywhere near the trigger. And I was like, I didn't even think about that. I saw the shape of the gun, and had I been close enough, I probably would have put half a magazine in that dude. Wow. And I was just like, that's actually pretty cool.
That's pretty switched on right there.
I was like, that's what you want to be at. You want to be the guy that's like assessing everything.
Wow.
So that was definitely my first takeaway from my first, 10 targets.
That is some serious target ID.
Yeah. And so that was my team sergeant. He was really big on that stuff. He was like, hey, anybody can go into these places and just shoot the crap out of it. He's like, if that's what was needed, we could call the regular army and they could just shoot tank rounds at the place, who cares, whatever. He's like, but they're sending us in here for a reason. We want to get these guys alive. We want to get intel. This is all going to tie into a much bigger piece. It's going to help us take down the remnants of Saddam's, cronies. And then it's also going to help us run down the Al-Qaeda guys. So we're here for a very specific mission, and we got to do our jobs like professionals.
Let's rewind back to your first op. How did the team, were they critiquing you after your first operation?
Oh, definitely.
How was it?
For sure.
What was their impression of you?
I ran aggressively into there. So they were like, hey, his heart's in the right spot. Like you might want to amp it down a little bit, like be a little bit calmer, assess the situation a little more. We definitely did like a full AAR, did rehearsals again the next day, tried to implement what we had learned. Definitely developed some pretty good TTPs about, especially because all those compounds in Baghdad, all those houses, almost all of them had like the gate up front. Mm-hmm. And so, we initially assessed, put a guy up over just to kind of cover the courtyard, but we had some fumbling around with the gate. And so then we started talking about, hey, do we just run up hard and ram the gate to get guys to get a foothold in, or do we want to start looking at going over the wall? And that's something we were debating heavily. But, the critiques for me were like, hey, you're at an 11 or a 12 and like maybe dial it down to like a 5 or a 6. And I think it took me quite a while to get there because it was just like, the mentality then, especially with CQB, was like be as aggressive as possible, was like get into every room and dominate it and control it. It's kind of funny saying that now. What we learned subsequently in the wars is like that's exactly what the enemy was anticipating that we would do. And so having a more calm approach and a more methodic approach definitely is much more beneficial.
It's definitely interesting to see how much the tactics have changed, since the beginning up until all the way up until the end.
Yeah.
But let's talk about your first op where you guys went kinetic. Yeah. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, for sure. So we were really lucky. I think because we're operating in a very bottom-up environment, we were able to get a drop on a lot of the bad guys. And also it was early on in the war, so I don't think the bad guys knew our tactics as well as they would in subsequent wars or in subsequent years of the war. We took some fire here and there, a little bit of returning fire. So there was gunplay kind of on the streets every now and again. Mm-hmm. But again, it's that sweet spot too. The IED threat wasn't that really that big. I think the first time we really got into a proper scrape was in Fallujah. So the next deployment went back and essentially did the same mission. We can kind of go back, but we took the Iraqi commandos. We had trained them up later on in that first deployment that I was on. But we took them into Fallujah, and we took the hospital that's on the western side of the Euphrates right there. So it was actually the first target we took down in Phantom Fury. In the hospital itself, I don't know why. We should have gotten stitched up, but we didn't. There was foreign fighters in there. They had machine guns. They had explosives. But for whatever reason, we got the drop on them. But then when the sun came up, we took a ton of accurate fire. Probably the most accurate mortar, sniper, and RPG fire that I had been under was there. Because before in Baghdad, I think we were kind of fighting a lot of financiers, a lot of guys who weren't like pros, like the dudes that hung out in Fallujah that knew we were coming in. Like those guys were ready to fight.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.